And welcome back to, I can't believe I'm saying it again, the 100th episode of Inside the Ropes. I can't believe for 100 consecutive weeks we have managed to talk about wrestling and people still listen. But one of the reasons that people still listen is the guy that came on our show earlier on this summer and over 35,000 people downloaded his interview with us. And that's who you wanted back. So we thought for episode 100, who else could we bring back? But the man that's everywhere. He's on the Steve Austin show this week. He's got his own podcast with MLW. He's coming to the UK. He's got a book out. It is only a matter of time before it's announced that he is challenging the Undertaker's streak in New Orleans. It is the one and only Mr. Jim Cornette. Jim, welcome back.
Well, thank you, Kenny. I appreciate you having me. And as far as New Orleans and The Undertaker goes, I was a big deal in Mid-South Wrestling, and I'm sorry I can't put the man over in New Orleans. So we may have a problem with the finish. We may not be able to put that match together. But as a matter of fact, I'm going to be in New Orleans WrestleMania weekend at the Mid-South Legends Fan Fest and Reunion, hanging out with the Midnight Express, the Rock and Roll Express, and a bunch of my old Mid-South cronies that weekend, and that's going to be exciting. But the 100th show, you know, it's something. It's kismet. It's synergy. It's all coming together because Fighting Spirit magazine, FSM, of course, the UK's largest and finest pro wrestling and combat sports publication. I do a monthly column for that magazine, and they just celebrated their 100th episode, or 100th issue, I should say. And now you're doing the 100th episode. I've got a column in there. I'm your guest here. I'm the guy when you hit the century mark. You know, you got to come to Jim Cornette, and we're going to get together, and not only via telecommunications, but we're actually going to see each other face to face, nose to nose, toes to toes in the UK in February, because we have got big news. Do you want to reveal the news, or should I reveal the news? You reveal the news, and I'll talk about the news.
Yeah, okay. So basically, you announced through Wrestle Talk TV that you were coming to the UK in February for your one-man show, and everybody was really excited about it. There was one thing on that sort of on the tour that people were kind of up in arms about. It was, where was the Scotland date? And we got private messages on our account saying, you know, you guys do the Inside the Ropes live shows, and you know, why is Jim Cornette not come to Scotland? So we reached out to you.
Oh, and I got it. I got it on my Twitter too. I mean, it was like the villagers carrying pitchforks looking for the Frankenstein monster. They were up in arms. Where's the love for Scotland?
Exactly. So basically, we put our heads together, and we are very, very pleased to announce that on Monday, the 17th of February, in your first ever UK Q&A, you're going to be in Glasgow, Scotland at the Classic Grand. That is exciting news.
That's right. Not only did you, I don't know how you do it, Kenny, you silver-tongued little devil, as Dusty Rhodes would say, you silver-tongued little devil. Not only have you gotten a Scotland date added, but it's actually added to the front of the tour. So you guys get the debut show. This will be the first time that I have ever appeared live in person outside the United States and Canada. Right there in Glasgow.
Yeah, it's exciting, and I think if anyone has listened to your podcast, or you know, because you're infamous for so many things, the Dairy Queen, the rants, and all that sort of stuff. But one thing that people really know about you is Jim Cornette's never going to get on a plane, but you are, apparently.
Well, you know, it started out, actually, I'll tell you how this whole thing came about. I was contacted by a gentleman named James Dixon, and at the same time, a gentleman that you know named Alex Shane. Both of them independently contacted me about the possibility of doing a tour of the UK, and they knew of my severe aversion, let's say, to flying, and so they suggested that they would get me a cruise for myself and my wife, because also a lot of people know my lovely better half, Mrs. C, the Queen of Castle Cornette. She loves her some UK. She loves England. She loves Ireland. She loves Scotland. She's going to go berserk over your accent, by the way. and she's wanted me to take her there for so long, but I've been averse to getting in a metal tube and flying at 500 miles an hour, 5 miles in the air above an ocean, because I for various reasons, I'm a free perspirer. I'm claustrophobic. I don't have a lot of patience for rude people and close quarters. I'm scared of heights. It said I'm a control freak. I don't even let people drive my car usually, the whole 9 yards. But you know how, are you married, Kenny?
I'm not, but one day, hopefully.
Well, then you don't know what pressure can be placed on someone by their app. And so then we were checking out the cruises, and then we realized, well, if we did a proper tour and a proper vacation over there at the same time, that that we would be gone from home for about a month. And even though I'm semi-retired these days, I'm actually busy to be semi-retired. I don't know how that works out, but that wasn't feasible. So I'm going to bite the bullet. As Jim Ross twittered last week, this trip will be sponsored by Xanax under medical supervision. I may get Dr. Conrad Murray, Michael Jackson's doctor, to give me some propofol. But my lovely wife Stacy is going to be there to hold my hand and lead me around in my anesthetized state to get me out of that flying metal tube, and then I'm going to have a wonderful time while I'm in England and Scotland and taking this tour. And the one thing about my Q&As, you know, I've done every year in Charlotte at the NWA Legends reunion. I do a one-man show, and I've done a few here and there, and it's kind of like the Bruce Springsteen concert of wrestling Q&As. It goes on for a while, and everybody leaves spent and exhausted, including myself, but you get your money's worth out of it. And there will be no worries with that, and I've made the specific instructions, and I'm heavily involved with the planning. I've got a little OCD, the obsessive compulsive thing. So I'm heavily involved with the planning of this, the schedule. I'm an OCD person when it comes to getting to places early. I'm getting to the country several days early before the tour starts. I'm getting to all the towns several hours early to check out the buildings and make sure everything's right. We're not going to have any, there won't be any, I don't want to cast aspersions on any tours that have happened in the recent past, but there's not going to be any deal like we'll be back for part 2 and then we don't come back.
I wonder what you could be talking about, Jim. I wonder what you could be talking about.
We definitely would, you know, barring some type of international terrorism or nuclear war, we will be starting on time. Now, I can't guarantee we'll finish on time because I do go on. And as long as everybody's having fun, we're going to make sure that everybody's there. The meet and greets are going to be structured well so that I have personal time with everybody. We're doing a couple of VIP dinners and wrestling school seminars, things. Just, you know, I'm excited about it. I'm really excited about seeing the place, seeing the country, not just for, you know, myself, but also to meet all these fans that, you know, the fans over in the UK are just so rabid and knowledgeable and enthusiastic. I'm really excited about that. I'm going to get the trip out of the way and dwell on the positive things.
Exactly. Well, do you know, there was a person that had bought a ticket or tickets to the London show already, and they got in touch with Wrestle Talk to kind of ask a question about their tickets, and someone had said to them, oh, you know, we might actually be doing a Scottish date now because the guy came from Scotland. And instead of the guy saying, you know, can I get my money back? He was like, oh, great, I can see Jim twice. So,
well, I recommend that. I actually do. I recommend, actually, if anybody wants to take the tour with me, you know, maybe Wrestle Talk can come up with a combo package where you can just hop in the back seat and ride around with me. I don't know what that might cost. But yeah, I recommend that everybody come, like we do here in the United States, vote early and often. You know, come to see all of my shows because, and you know, that's another thing. None of them are going to be the same because I would just I got to visit with Mick Foley last week. He was here in my hometown of Louisville appearing at the Comedy Caravan with his one-man show. And, you know, Mick's kind of like me. He says, you know, he didn't know whether to call it stand-up or spoken word or Q&A or one-man show because he does a little bit of everything. And he's got tremendous delivery, and Mick is just a brilliant, entertaining human being. And I got a chance to get up on stage and do the Q&A with him after his regular show, and you know, we had a wonderful time. And I'm kind of in the same boat. No two shows are the same because a lot of it, I tell, depends on the audience. If the audience sucks, then I will suck because we take a lot of questions. We feed off the audience. We do find sometimes comedic gold mined from some of the questions, either really good ones or really bad ones. We can go either way. But, you know, no two shows will be the same. So if you do come to two, you're going to get a lot of different stuff. I might have a couple of my favorite lines that I pepper in there, but out of 2 or 3 hours of conversation, you're going to get a lot of different stuff.
But yeah, I thought we could talk about some stuff that's kind of going on just now. One of the things that's kind of broken out this week, and it's not confirmed or anything, but a lot of people are talking about AJ Styles in TNA. And you obviously worked in TNA for a while and you were around AJ Styles, and there's rumours that he might not be staying around in TNA or that he might be sort of going somewhere else. What were your experiences like with AJ Styles, and do you think that he sort of Do you think he is the right guy for TNA to sort of push as a top star, or is he someone that is more a sort of mid-level guy?
Well, no, I think AJ's a great kid personally as well as professionally. He's a great talent. He's been with TNA for the past, I guess, 10 or 11 years since the start of the company. And I can understand exactly where he's coming from. If the reports I've heard are true, I have not, spoken to AJ personally. I'm not on the inside of things, but, we read things on the internet. And if it's on the internet, it must be true, right?
Of course.
That basically AJ felt that as his contract was up, that he has been getting incremental raises, over the period of time as he's gone on, as a longer tenured employee would. And that they offered him either the same money or even less money that he's been making when he thought that he wanted more. Basically, the sides are apart on money, which is the root of problems in a lot of business deals. And, if I know AJ as well as I think I do, he's not a person, he doesn't have any bad habits that I'm aware of. He doesn't spend his money frivolously. He's made a good living in wrestling for the last decade, and I think it's a situation, probably just reading into it from what I've heard, where he feels that if he is not worth the money that he's asking for to TNA, regardless of their situation, that he might either take a break or do something else, or it might be a matter of principle, is what I'm saying. And I can't argue with that. As far as whether he is a mid-level or a main event guy, he's been a main event guy in TNA. He's been presented as a main event guy, and also one of their homegrown guys that are really identified with the TNA roster. There becomes the problem that, I got to go ahead and do it. I'll mention a guy already, Vince Russo. Vince Russo was in charge of TNA Creative for so much of the past 11 years that really a lot of guys have been rendered meaningless as far as draws. I've always said Russo doesn't get guys over, he gets guys under. So, we were faced with a situation. I was talking to Delirious one time when we were having a booking meeting for Ring of Honor, and we were just, throwing out the what ifs. Well, what if we could get this guy, or what if we could get that guy? And we looked at Samoa Joe, who was one of the dominant Ring of Honor champions of all time, and a tremendous attraction for Ring of Honor, and we both looked at each other and said, with what TNA has done with him, if we could get him now, we're not sure whether we'd want him. And that's sad to say for a talent like Joe or for a talent like AJ, but unfortunately, the way that the TNA talent has been, it's not like I'm just picking on those guys. Jeff Hardy was the biggest star in wrestling, and after he'd been in TNA for 12 months, he was one of the guys on the card. After that, wrestlers have been in TNA for a significant period of time, they are rendered meaningless as far as money draws, to the point where I can also, believe it or not, I'm saying this, see TNA's side as, we can't pay AJ Styles that much money because he's not worth it to us at the box office or for ratings. The problem is, the reason why he's not is because it's their fault. But so that's why AJ probably feels the way he does. So you can kind of see how this developing story is continuing to develop. But right now there's a lot of great talent in TNA, and I almost think for most of them, they would need to go away for a while from not only from TNA, but from the public view, and get basically, as we say here down south in the United States, the TNA stank off of them.
And were you, because obviously I don't know how much you're watching this year of wrestling. I know that you were going to kind of ease yourself back into things and maybe watch a little bit here and there.
Yeah, I haven't really started yet. I try to keep up with things by reading the the wrap-ups and everything of the few people that I trust to tell me the true story, but I haven't watched a lot of wrestling. Old wrestling, yes. I'm loving watching some. I watched the Mid-South Legends DVD that was released, and that was a thrill for me. I sat down and watched that on the big screen, but I haven't watched a lot of current product.
I wanted to ask you about one of the guys that you managed in the WWF, purely because he was actually in Scotland this past weekend, and that was Vader, who was in Scotland wrestling this past weekend. And whenever you see him now, he does seem a bit grumpy. He just doesn't seem like a guy that's really loving life. And I just wonder, do you have any sort of stories with Vader of him being happy at any point?
Well, Leon's a complicated guy, and I really enjoyed my time working with him, and I have seen him in those grumpy phases. But also, I've seen him, and he's a giant, just a bear of a man. And I've seen when he would be face to face with a kid in a wheelchair that would be brought backstage to meet the wrestlers, or, some situation like that. I've actually seen him, blubber up into tears and, really take time with the kids or with a fan or whatever. So he was a big bear, but he was a big teddy bear. He had a bite. And you probably didn't want to get on the wrong side of him in the ring, but outside the ring, he was a quality, a genuine human being. So I haven't talked to him, gosh, in ages, and he lives way out in Colorado, and I live way out in Kentucky, but I haven't seen him in quite a while. But I would assume the same thing still holds true.
Well, one of the things that a lot of wrestling fans are sort of discussing at the moment is the unification match that WWE are going to do with their two world titles. So the old WCW title and their WWE title are going to be unified at the next pay-per-view with Randy Orton and John Cena. And one of our listeners, Stuart McPherson, wonders kind of what you think about that. Do you think it is the right decision for them to make one world champion and make it feel more special, or do you think that it is best to have two different champions that can go and headline different shows?
I think it would be best to have one champion and make it more special, and I also think that horse has left the barn, cowboy. That's once again, I hate to be negative Nancy or Debbie Downer, but you see why that, when watching the current product, it gives me gas, because once again, for years in wrestling, everybody knew who the world champion was. Now, it depended on what part of the country you lived in here in the United States. For most of the country, the world champion was the NWA champion. Mm-hmm. But Harley Race would hold it for 3 years. Dory Funk Jr. would have it for 3 years. Ric Flair would hold it for periods of years. Lou Thez, pretty much lived with the thing. Everybody knew he's the champ. In the AWA, it was generally Vern Gagne, who was an NCAA heavyweight champion wrestler who had a tremendous amateur background and who, from Minnesota, was home area hero. Of course, in the Northeast, it was Bruno Sammartino for all those years. No matter who came and went, everybody knew Bruno's the champ. Well, now the problem is that for years and years, the title, instead of being viewed as a prize in sports, everybody knew when Muhammad Ali was the boxing champion. Everybody knew when Joe Louis or Mike Tyson, any great boxer, etc. Everybody knows now, who the champions are. Really, if you're an MMA fan, you know who the champions are in the UFC. But the titles have been used as props. Vince Russo, once again, I'll mention the name, but he's had a lot of help and a lot of people doing the same thing. Oh, let's switch the belt. Let's put the belt on this guy or that guy or the other guy, or, somebody cashes in a briefcase and covers the dead guy, that's just been beaten up, and he wins the belt from him in an impromptu, blah, blah, blah. It's just been used as a prop. It's been devalued. It's been prostituted. And once again, besides that, now that everybody pretty much knows that pro wrestling is predetermined, choreographed, manipulated, worked, whatever, synonym you want to use for it, what difference does it make who the champion is? Because they know that somebody awards you that belt anyway. That's the only time I really disagreed with Bret Hart was when, after he really got screwed in Montreal, he called all the newspapers in Canada and said, Shawn didn't really beat me. I got screwed. He didn't call those newspapers when he won the belt and say, I didn't really win it. The guy let me pin him. But that's the problem, is now people don't take it seriously. So it doesn't matter who the champion is. It's a shiny belt that, people can buy replicas of. And that's another tool in our toolkit, or arrow in our quiver in the wrestling industry, that we have devalued to the point where it doesn't make us any money anymore. And it's sad.
But one of our listeners, when we sort of said you were coming back, the biggest question everyone had was, where does Jim Cornette see the business going? Where does he see it in 10 years and all that sort of stuff? But one of our listeners had a question that I think I'd love to hear your answer to. And he says, if Vince offered you a blank check and complete creative control to go back to WWE, what would your first order of business be? So if we're in an alternative universe and all wrestling promoters have collapsed and the only person that can take WWE is you, what would be the first thing that you would do to sort of change things?
So let me recap this. Vince McMahon gives me a blank check and complete control and says, do what you want to do.
Yes.
I would write that check for $50 million, cash it, buy me a private island in the South Pacific, and you'd never see my fat ass again. And he'd be wondering, where's Jim? We haven't seen Jim in a while. Where is Jim? And Jim would be over on his island. Obviously that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I don't even know where I'd start, because really that's why I've lost. And I love talking to the fans, and I love answering their questions, and especially illustrating the difference in the way that the business used to be and the way that it's presented now, and the et cetera. But I feel so bad for the young guys who didn't get to experience what we got to experience, and now a very small handful can make much more money than the guys used to be able to, but the rest of them, it's unfortunately a dream that's not going to come true. And, for every Rolling Stones, there's a band playing in a garage or a bar somewhere that is just doing it for fun. And now, unfortunately, it's more and more wrestling is getting in that category. To me, the reason why I've just lost so much passion for it is because I really think we've passed the tipping point. Pro wrestling for 100 years was anytime you charge money, when you charge admission for somebody to see something, it becomes entertainment. Even if it's a completely legitimate sport, it's still entertainment because you're charging admission to see what's going to happen, and people are entertained by it. There was always an element of working. There's been an element of working in boxing. And to me, the UFC is completely legitimate inside the ring, but of course they use the same pro wrestling tricks that were used for 100 years to hype fights because they worked. Mm-hmm. People always want to see the grudge match. They always want to see the trash talker get his I's dotted and his T's crossed by, the guy that they like. And so that's why UFC, to me, is now the most successful pro wrestling promotion in the world. So the answer is we've passed the tipping point, because for so long, professional wrestling, the logic behind it was this is presented as a legitimate sport where two individuals, one that people are predisposed to like and one that people are predisposed to dislike, are going to have a fight, and we're going to sell tickets to see who's going to win the title or who's going to win the grudge or who's going to win the money. And it was manipulated behind the scenes. And in the 20s and 30s and 40s, there was a little manipulation in a lot of wrestling. And then gradually, those places reversed until now it's all manipulation and no wrestling or legitimacy. But when the fans found out about it, when we just came out and admitted it, I used this analogy on the Steve Austin show, which you can, look it up. Steve's information is Podomatic.com
podcast1.com
Steve Austin, but podcast1.com / Steve Austin show. But I'll use this. You get the material that Steve Austin's show got. It's like now that people know that everything about wrestling is so tightly controlled and scripted, which it didn't even used to be 30 years ago. It was so much looser then, and that's why it got over as so much more believable and passionate. But it's like you go up to a pretty girl that you desperately want to go out with, and you ask her out, and she says, I'd love to go to dinner with you, and you beam, and then she says, I don't really like you, and I wouldn't fuck you in a million years, but I'm looking forward to the free meal. They know we're yanking their chain with what we're doing, and that's why I don't know why there's really a logical reason to do it anymore. And I'm afraid that in 10 years, pro wrestling, it'll always exist in some form, and the WWE is too rich. They got more money than the federal government. They'll never go away completely, but I don't know that it can ever be as popular in the mainstream and certainly taken as seriously and certainly be a live event product that draws like it used to ever again. I'm afraid it might become roller derby, which I don't even know if y'all had roller derby.
Barely. Yeah.
Barely. Well, roller derby in the United States, especially when TV hit in the 50s, was second only to wrestling in popularity. And actually, they were having roller derby games in stadiums in Chicago in the early 70s, drawing 20, 30,000 people. And within a couple of years, it was gone because there were only two roller derby companies. One concentrated more on roller games as a sport, or roller derby as a sport, and one concentrated roller games as a little bit more showbiz. And one was family owned and one was owned by businessmen. And long story short, too late, a couple of bad decisions and a gasoline crisis put roller derby out of business on a mainstream basis, and it's never recovered. 2 years after they were drawing 30,000 people in Chicago, they were off touring completely. And that can happen. And I think that in 10 years, what we may see is, even Dana White would probably shit if he hears me say this, but I think that what we will see just like the wrestlers, instead of the promoters, were the first ones in pro wrestling 100 years ago to say, hey, we're the top guys. If you and me, Kenny, if you and me, we split, the first 2 matches and had a grudge match, we could make a killing at the gate. I think maybe a couple of the UFC fighters might actually figure out that what wrestling did 100 years ago and say, hey, if we just work this amongst ourselves, and then it spreads, and then pro wrestling happens all over again. But it'll take a few decades, although things move a lot quicker now with the internet and worldwide live television and instant information access. The UFC has already progressed probably the first 30 years of pro wrestling in the last 5 or 10. So it's all on speed search now. But sooner or later, one or two of the guys in a big main event match has got to figure we could make a killing on our pay-per-view bonuses if we work this amongst ourselves. But that's a whole nother kettle of fish for another day.
Well, it's funny, mentioning the internet there, one of the kind of tools that I guess, especially for people in the UK, because if we sit up and watch Raw, for example, it starts at 1 a.m. on Tuesday morning. So it's like 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. But one of the kind of things that is fun about watching Raw live is you can go on Twitter and you can watch guys like Lance Storm tweeting throughout the show, or you can watch Steve Austin tweeting about the show, and there's a kind of fun interaction there that never used to be there. So at least that's one positive that's come after all.
That is, and at least it also gives people something else to do, because I will admit I've been clean and sober from WWE programming for some time now, but I was in a hotel room. I went to the Legends of the Ring convention in New Jersey back in October, and coming back, I got hit with bad weather. It was thunderstorms and tornado warnings, and I got off the Pennsylvania Turnpike, checked in a hotel, and I'm sitting in a hotel till the weather blows over the next day, and I've got nothing to do because I hadn't even planned on staying over. I was headed back home, so I'm sitting in a box with a television, and the morbid curiosity hit me, and it was Monday, and so here comes Raw, and I swear to God, during the course of that program, I had a birthday. That was the longest 3 hours of my life. Oh my God, because it just kept going and going, but there wasn't any life. They've wrung the life and the passion out of it. There's midgets running around, and there's girls bad acting, and I know there's some great athletes there and some guys that really can go in the ring, but at the same time, there's always something that hurts my feelings in between those, brief moments of brilliance that it went on forever. And so as the old saying, she's so ugly they put her picture in prison to cure sex offenders. I have a feeling if you just sentence somebody to watch a loop of a 3-hour Raw over and over again and pick one of the really bad ones, you could probably, that would be a good penance for prisoners in state penitentiaries to serve.
So here's my question though. Did you watch the full 3 hours?
Well, actually, I started watching it, and I was reading the newspaper, and it kept going on, and I was watching it some more, and then I realized I was hungry, so I had a commercial break. I jumped in the car and ran down to Wendy's on the corner, came back 15 minutes later. It was still going on. and I truthfully, I don't remember anything that was on the program, and it was only in October, and that's the only one that I've watched in a while, like a couple of years. So I just remember that and I was looking forward to seeing the Wyatt family, and this is the one thing I remember, because I'd heard so much about the Wyatts. So I'm going to see these Wyatts. It was the show where they just basically came down the ramp, sat there in the rocking chair, and looked at somebody, and they were on for like 30 seconds, and that was it. And Heyman did like a 30-second promo, and I've heard his stuff, and I will admit, Paulie and I have had our checkered past, but he is good at what he does, and he's got a head. I wouldn't believe him anything he says if his tongue was notarized, but he's got a great talent for being the prick that he is. And I was looking for, and he talked for 30 seconds, and I'm like, okay, this is pretty much not the one I should have watched it, but I'm trapped here.
Well, just as we close things off, Christmas is coming up, and I just thought to close this out, what better way to close it out than for you, Jim, to sit back in your chair and just give us your memory of one of the most revered wrestling characters that Vince McMahon ever created. Of course, I mean Santa Claus.
Oh, my Lord, have mercy. That was Boo Bradley from Smoky Mountain Wrestling, Balls Mahoney, right?
Yeah.
Vince, it's like when Glenn Jacobs, Kane, before he became Kane, when he was Unibomb for me in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, I guess Vince went to the dentist one day and didn't enjoy himself because he called up and said, I've got a great spot for that kid you've got down there. He's going to be an evil dentist. And the same thing, it was coming up on Christmas time, and I don't know why, but Vince suddenly got the idea of an evil Santa Claus. And, jumping shitballs, that was bad. And it didn't last long, at least. But yeah, Santa Claus, because, it was a hard Z rather than the soft S of Santa Claus. But yeah, and I think Ted, I put it out of my mind like a post-traumatic stress disorder victim, but wasn't Ted DiBiase somehow wrapped up in that, poor Ted?
Yeah, I think he was. Yeah.
He presented him or whatever, but yeah, Santa Claus didn't last long, and I hated it for the talent, Boo, Balls. Hate to call a guy Balls, but Boo, but hated it for him because he was a good guy, but no, that wasn't going to work. That didn't have a snowball's chance in a hot oven.
There you go. There is a thought to leave us with. Well, Jim, I hope you enjoy your Christmas vacation, and we will see you in Glasgow on February the 17th.
That's right. Hey, and by the way, you talk about Christmas, wonderful stocking stuffers. For the wrestling fan and the family, come see Jim Cornette live and in person in my first ever international appearance. And the website, jimcornettelive.co.uk. You can get all the information for all of my appearances in Manchester, Birmingham, Cardiff, London at Leicester Square Theatre, which I can't wait to see. We're doing a dinner in Nottingham. We're doing a couple of seminars, and also the debut. First night, Glasgow.
Indeed.
What more can we say?
If you listen to the 2 hours of the Steve Austin Show and you've listened to this and you still can't get enough, then Jim has his very own podcast on MLW Radio every Thursday, the Jim Cornette Experience, where you don't just talk wrestling, you talk politics, you talk pop culture, whatever's on your mind, and that's available through MLW every Thursday.
I almost forgot. Court Bauer would have killed me if I'd have done that. Yes, please become one of the cult of Cornette and listen to the Jim Cornette Experience. And I think that's all I got to plug for right now.
It is. I'm sure we can. I'm sure if you have anything else, then we can let people know in due course. Jim, thank you so much.
I can take credit apps from the fans if they can't go for all of this at the same time. You can make installments. But I appreciate it, Kenny. Thank you. I look forward to being back on the program, and I'll see you guys in Glasgow in February.
Great. Have a good Christmas. Take care.
Merry Christmas.